Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want to start today's episode by doing a little word association. And I'm going to say a word, and then I want you to think about the first words that come to mind. So here goes. Jamaica. So when you think of Jamaica, my guess is you're probably thinking of a tropical paradise with white sandy beaches and crystal clear blue ocean and palm trees. But what you're probably not thinking of immediately is snow and ice and dressing in layers because you're freezing cold. And the reason that that's on my mind today is because in Jamaica in the late 80s, if you thought about Jamaican athletes, you thought about sprinters, Olympic sprinters. And really that's still true more than 40 years later. But in the 1980s, Jamaica, the powers that be, decided that they wanted to send a team to compete in the Winter Olympics. And they wanted to compete in one of the fastest, the most technical, the most dangerous winter sports in the world. They wanted to have a bobsled team. And so predictably, people laughed at them and mocked them and treated it kind of like it was a novelty act or like a joke instead of them being legitimate contenders or competitors. But the 1988 Jamaican bobsled team trained, and they actually qualified for the Olympics, and they showed up at the Winter Olympics in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and they lined up on that same ice, on that bobsled run with the most established bobsled teams in the world, and they competed. Now, they didn't win a medal, and actually their third run on the four-man bobsled, they crashed. But here's what they did do. They earned respect. They demonstrated how to take things seriously and to be professional in their athletic endeavors, and they taught lessons about preparation and that belief matters more than tradition. Because Sweden, Norway, it's a tradition for lots of athletes to be in lots of events in the Olympics, but certainly that wasn't the case in Jamaica. But I want you to hear this. This story that I want to tell you today and these lessons that I want you to learn, this isn't a sports story. Even though if you're listening to this in real time, the Winter Olympics are going on, and that's why this is on my mind. But this isn't a sports story. This is a leadership story. Because on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we are going to discuss 4 leadership lessons from the 1988 Jamaican bobsled team. So before we get into that, I want to ask you another question. And I want you to think about this one. So what is your biggest struggle at school right now? What is your biggest struggle at school right now? So whatever comes to mind, I just want to let you know that I can help you with that struggle. I can make it better. We can even maybe work together and make that struggle go away. And as I record this, I had one coaching spot open up yesterday. I do one-on-one coaching, and I have one coaching spot that opened up yesterday. If you're interested, check out theprivateschoolleader.com/coaching or shoot me an email at mark.o.minkus@gmail.com, and I'd love to work with you. So just think about, what is that struggle, and What would life be like if that struggle got better or even went away? And then I want to give you a free gift for just saying thank you for listening to the podcast. And this is called The Top 6 Ways to Protect Your School from a Lawsuit. And this is a 10-page PDF that will help you to keep your staff and students safe and help keep your school out of court, because litigation is expensive and time-consuming and very stressful. And this common sense guide will help you be more intentional and proactive when it comes to protecting your school. So you can go to theprivateschoolleader.com/lawsuit to grab the top 6 ways to protect your school from a lawsuit. It's a free gift for you, a PDF with all of that content there. And you can grab that at theprivateschoolleader.com/lawsuit. All right. So we're talking about the 4 leadership lessons from the 1988 Jamaican bobsled team. And as we go through these lessons, I'll kind of talk about how this was on display by that team. And you may be familiar with the story, you may not be, but the quick version is kind of what I said in the open, that in the 80s, the island of Jamaica, they had a lot of amazing athletes, and they competed in the summer games, mostly in sprinting, and they decided they wanted to be part of the Winter Olympics. And of course, if you've ever seen the bobsled, you know that there's some sprinting on ice when they're pushing, before they jump into that bobsled. And so that was the way that they decided to go. And so they went, and the media and probably the more traditional powers in that sport in the Winter Olympics thought that this was a joke, that they were disrespecting the Winter Olympics, that this was a novelty act, a circus sideshow. But that's not how it turned out. Now, they didn't have this, amazing sports movie, Disney movie, story where they went and won the gold medal. Like I said before, they qualified and they came in near the bottom, and they actually crashed on their 3rd or 4th run, but they earned a lot of respect. And so this weird, strange, amazing, inspiring story is going to teach us 4 leadership lessons today. So leadership lesson number 1 is your vision must be bigger than your current circumstances. Leadership lesson number 1 for you as a private school leader: your vision must be bigger than your current circumstances. So think about it this way. With the Jamaican bobsled team, 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, it was something where if they had looked around at their environment, if they had looked at the circumstances and focused only on that, with the beaches and the palm trees and the lack of snow, if they had looked only at their circumstances, they would have said, this is impossible, this is ridiculous, and they never would have even tried. And they didn't have the infrastructure. They didn't have the ability to train. There were no bobsled runs built in Jamaica. They didn't have a climate advantage. They weren't even used to the cold. They had limited resources. And here's the thing, if they had only focused on what they were lacking, that story never would have even happened. The story would have been over before it even started. But they focused on a vision more than they focused on their circumstances. And what they did is they just decided, we want to compete at the Olympic level. We have Olympic level athletes that can run really fast, and we're going to learn, and we're going to train, and we're going to figure this out. And so the vision came first, and then they figured out the how. And so they got creative. They did some training in Jamaica with the sprinting. They practiced what they could practice there. And then they went to Canada. They went to Austria. In the days leading up to the Olympics, they were actually training on a frozen lake near Calgary with their bobsled. They had to get creative. But they didn't focus on the current circumstances and just lean into all of these limiting beliefs. Their vision was bigger than their circumstances. So how does that apply to you as a private school leader? Well, we have a lot of obstacles, and we have a lot of things that stress us out, and we have a lot of things that might keep us from dreaming big or having a big vision for our schools. And that could be, you look at the budget, you look around at your facility and your campus. Maybe it's an aging facility. You look at your enrollment numbers. You look at maybe a staffing shortage, and you're concerned about, am I going to be able to find enough teachers for the fall? And so I read a phrase when I was preparing for this episode, that when circumstances lead, vision shrinks. When circumstances lead, vision shrinks. But when vision leads, if we flip that script, okay, we're going to flip the script. If vision leads, then circumstances adjust. And so let me get practical about what I mean. As I said before, we can get too focused on our current circumstances, and that can keep us from dreaming big. It can keep us from dreaming about that, having that vision for that new gymnasium that has a stage in it where we can have our basketball games and our volleyball games and our winter concert and our graduation ceremony. And if we look at our circumstances and are only looking at our circumstances, then maybe our school doesn't grow and it doesn't have a new initiative, or maybe the technology access is not what it should be. And I think sometimes, I know I certainly have done this, and maybe you've done this too, is that we're supposed to be an optimist and a realist as we lead our schools. But sometimes I think that day-to-day grind, where we're solving problems all the time and we're just trying to move the school year forward, that what's right in front of our face, what's latest and loudest, what's 6 inches in front of our face, the reality of those circumstances keeps us from having that big vision and that big dream. But we have to be able to see it first and latch onto it. And it's conceived first in the mind, and then we get excited about it, and then we can try to reverse engineer it. But we can't just focus on our circumstances, because if the Jamaican bobsled team or the Jamaican Olympic officials looked around and they didn't see any snow, that idea would have never happened. And here we are all these years later, nearly 40 years later, and they still have a Jamaican bobsled team in the Olympics every time they have Winter Olympics. So let me give you one strategy for this lesson that you can use. I'm going to link episode 143 in the show notes. The show notes are at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 173. And in episode 143, it is part one of a 2-part episode titled The 6 Keys to Significantly Improving the Culture at Your School. And the reason that I'm linking part one is because the very first thing that I talk about in that episode is how to dream, how to have a vision, how to avoid looking at your circumstances only, and how to think big about the future of your school in 3 to 5 years. And it's called the 5 Senses activity, where you take some time and you have to be in a quiet place where you're not going to be interrupted, and you just start writing down, 3 years from today, if I can envision the version of the school that I want it to be, the culture, the facilities, the morale, the teacher morale level, the enrollment, the financial side of the school, all of those things. You're writing down the things that you see, the things that you hear, the things you can touch, and even the things that you taste and the things that you can smell. And that might sound a little weird, but give it a try. Episode 143, the five senses activity, is a way that you can take your eyes off of your circumstances that are right in front of your face and actually dream big and have that big vision for your school. Okay, that brings us to leadership lesson number 2. And leadership lesson number 2 is take yourself seriously even if others don't. Take yourself seriously even if others don't. So with the Jamaican bobsled team, people made fun of them. People underestimated them. People thought that they were kind of like a novelty or, like I said, a circus sideshow for entertainment instead of like legitimate competitors. People didn't take them seriously, but they took themselves seriously. They never acted like this was a joke. They trained seriously. They had the right equipment. They had uniforms and helmets that looked just like everybody else. They showed up in a professional manner. They respected the sport. And they respected their competitors even if the competitors didn't respect them. And so the Jamaican bobsled team, people didn't take them seriously, but they took themselves seriously. So how does that apply to our private schools? So let me give you an example from my own experience, and we're going to go way back for this one. 1990. Summer of 1990 was my first year teaching, and I was also coaching the varsity boys basketball team at my school. And I went to the principal at the time, and we were not in the league for the private schools in that area. We weren't in the league. And for the previous few years, they were just playing. They would just make up a schedule, and they would play other schools that were about our same size, and they weren't in the league. So no league standings, no playoffs, no chance to win the championship. And I asked the principal, well, why? And he's like, well, we would get killed. We would get our butts kicked if we were in the league. And so what I said, and I pushed for, and what I was eventually able to accomplish was, I think our team needs new uniforms because the uniforms looked awful. It looked like something that, someone found in their grandma's attic was what the team uniforms looked like. I was able to persuade him that we needed to join the league and we needed to get new uniforms. We needed to take ourselves seriously. And yeah, we did get our butts kicked in the first year. And then in the second year, we won some games. And in the fourth year, we were in the playoffs and won and actually got to the championship game. So you have to take yourself seriously, even if others don't take you seriously. And so another question that I have that's kind of along these lines is, are you acting like you have a grown-up school? Are you acting like you have a grown-up school? Now, that means different things to different people that are listening to this episode. But where I'm going with this, at least for me, I can't say what it means to you to have a grown-up school. I'm going to tell you what I mean by it. Do you have a grown-up school? And you might be like, well, Mark, you just don't understand. We're in this old building, and we don't have very many kids, and we don't this, and we don't that. And so, maybe it's kind of hard for you to take yourself and take your school seriously because it's such a small operation or because of your facilities or because of fill in the blank. Okay. And you might think I don't understand that, but I do, because my first 5 years being a principal, being a head of school, we were in a 90-year-old building. Our boilers rarely worked. The company that made the boilers was out of business, and the only way we could get parts was to, at that time, we're talking early 90s, pre-internet, was to check newspapers and call people at other schools that we knew had these boilers, and we would scavenge parts off of boilers once they had finally broken down to fix our own boiler. And in my first year or two, I don't think we took ourselves seriously, but then we decided that even if other people looked at us and what they saw was an old building and rundown campus and whatever they saw, that I decided that we were going to take ourselves seriously and we were going to become more of a grown-up school. So what does that look like? What does that mean? Well, does your school project competence? Does your school project excellence? Because competence leads to confidence and excellence leads to credibility. I'll say that again. Competence leads to confidence. Excellence leads to credibility. And so you're like, well, how can I have our school be taken more seriously? How can we take our school more seriously ourselves? That's the first step. Well, I think there's a few things. I put a few things here in my notes. High level of professionalism, high expectations, clear expectations in your handbook, your family handbook, your employee handbook, making sure that you have accountability for those. Because if everyone's just kind of doing their own thing and it's like, yeah, you know, we have a handbook, but blah, 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 well, then you're not taking yourself seriously. If your staff is dressed like a bunch of slobs and you can't tell whether it's like time to sit on the couch and watch Netflix or it's time to teach a class, then I'm not so sure that you're taking yourself seriously. And I'm not saying you need to wear, you know, your Sunday best every day to school, but again, have high expectations for yourself and for your school, accountability, a clean and inviting campus. You might have an old campus. I told you our building was 90 years old, but our campus was clean. We really emphasized the main entrance, get a little landscaping around the front, and make sure that that front entrance, the lobby is very inviting and well lit, looks good. What is it communicating to parents? What is your messaging? What is your website communicating to parents? If you have no social media presence and a prospective family goes to look at your website and it looks like one of your 7th graders did it in their spare time, that's going to turn people off because it doesn't look like you're taking yourself seriously. Now, I'm not saying you need to go out and spend $30,000 on a website, you know, redo, but I'm saying that there are tools out there now where someone with not a whole lot of technical knowledge using a template for not very expensive, for not a very high cost, can have a pretty good looking website. Nothing against going with a company or doing, you know, if you have the money to do that, great. But I'm just saying these are things, and especially these are true with smaller schools and with younger schools, where I think that we get stuck and, you know, maybe don't take ourselves seriously, and then other people aren't going to take us seriously. So stop thinking about things through the lens of your facilities or how big your school is or how small your school is, and start thinking about your school through the lens of high expectations that are communicated clearly, and then there's consistent accountability. That's what a grown-up school does. And you might be at a school where you have great facilities and you have, you know, a healthy enrollment, but maybe your division or maybe your school has kind of gotten away from some things, and we need to, and maybe you're thinking about, yeah, we really do need to improve the professionalism and that competence that leads to confidence and that excellence that leads to credibility. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just trying to shine a light on the fact that the Jamaican bobsled team, a bobsled team from Jamaica, okay, from a tropical paradise, and they're showing up and there's ice and snow. Nobody took them seriously, but they took themselves seriously. So just see how that applies, if it applies, to you and your school. And that brings us to leadership lesson number 3. The right leader makes all the difference. Lesson number 3 is the right leader makes all the difference. And so the way that this was true with the Jamaican bobsled team, Howard Seiler, he was their coach. He was a former bobsledder and then became, in the Army, he was an Army officer. And he was very, very disciplined, very strict. He didn't lower his standards because they didn't know what they were doing. He didn't play the game of like, this is a joke, this is a circus. Like, it was all about fundamentals and discipline and preparation and professionalism. And sometimes the team borrows their confidence from the leader until they have enough confidence on their own. And so some of it was the belief that Howard had in them, but a lot of it was the discipline and the high level of expectation that he had for them. He wasn't going to use the excuse that you guys are from a tropical island, you've maybe never seen snow, so we're just going to like kind of go through the motions here. No. And here's the thing, there are plenty of examples in the corporate world, in the world of professional sports, where someone, the business or maybe the team, they're not doing well at all. And then the next year, with the same facilities, the same team, the same budget, the same resources, they bring in a new leader, a new CEO, or a new head coach. And then all of a sudden, with the same resources, the same team, the same people, the same money, then all of a sudden now this business is taking off and is being successful, or this team is winning a bunch of games. So you've seen it. Sometimes that leader makes all the difference. And the reason that this matters for us as private school leaders is because John Maxwell says that everything rises and falls on leadership. And I think that schools really struggle when their leader lacks clarity, when their leader lacks integrity, when their leader lacks consistency, when their leader lacks courage. Those things aren't easy, but the tone of a school is set by the leader. And so are you calm under pressure, with your school, with your division? Do you make ethical decisions? Do you build trust through transparency? Do you treat your teachers like human beings first and as employees second? Do you give people autonomy but hold them accountable to what they're supposed to do according to the handbook or according to their job description? Do you have the courageous conversations? The tone of a school, the tone of a division is set by the leader. And here's the thing. This strategy that I want to just share with you is be the thermostat, not the thermometer. Be the thermostat, not the thermometer. You are the thermostat of the culture of your school. The thermostat controls the temperature. A thermometer just reports the temperature. You are the catalyst. You are the person who can change the current situation at your school and can set a course for what you want your school or your division to be in the future. And just like they got the right coach for the Jamaican bobsled team, and he took it seriously, had high standards, they got the right leader. Everything rises and falls on leadership at your school, in your division. Remember that you're the thermostat, not the thermometer. You're the leader. All right. That brings us to our fourth and final leadership lesson, and that is practicing in private matters most when stress is highest. Practicing in private matters most when stress is highest. So with the Jamaican bobsled team, when it was the first day of the bobsled competition at the Calgary Winter Games in 1988, it wasn't like they all of a sudden magically became bobsledders. Like, they had been training for months. And I mentioned they trained in Canada, they trained in Austria. They, even the day before their first run, they're out on a frozen lake in Calgary near the Winter Games compound, practicing their starts on the ice. The pressure was high. There was a lot of media scrutiny. Are these guys going to be a joke? They weren't a joke. They didn't win, but they were legitimate. They were not a laughingstock. They competed. They had some good times. And so their practice in private over those months, it showed up when the stress was high during those bright lights, cameras on, everybody interested moments. And they did a pretty good job. And so the way that we're going to apply this to you as a private school leader is, you're thinking, well, what does he mean practicing in private matters most when the stress is highest? Well, James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, he says, we don't rise to the level of our habits, we fall to the level of our systems. And so when we're under stress, when our schools are under stress, when it's an emergency or a crisis, or it is something that's super stressful, we're not going to all of a sudden rise to the occasion by luck. We're going to kind of fall to the level of our systems in our schools. And so a couple of scary ones and a couple of less scary ones. Are you having lockdown drills? Is everyone doing exactly what they're supposed to do? And are you reviewing and improving after you have a drill? How often are you having fire drills? Does your faculty know what to do in the case of blank? One of the big scary ones as far as potential emergencies. We got to rehearse those things. Some of the less scary ones, an upset parent just appears and storms into the office and is all upset. What's the procedure? Enrollment is way lower than you thought it was going to be. That's stressful. What are we going to do? You have to fire a teacher. You have to expel a student. Those are very emotional things. You don't all of a sudden become the leader that you need to be in those moments. I really believe that we default to what we've been practicing. And you're like, well, how am I supposed to practice firing a teacher or expelling a student? I get it. There are going to be a lot of firsts for you, especially if you're early in your career as a private school leader. But there are ways that you can prepare. And just a couple of things, clear plans, lots of drills, clear policies, consistency in following those policies, whether it has to do with respectful parent communication or a teacher performance improvement plan that perhaps turns into a separation of employment, or if it's a student and there's escalating consequences from lunch detention to suspension to possible expulsion. Are we following the things that we're supposed to do? And are we trying to stay emotionally regulated while we're doing those things? Because that's really tricky. But the thing that wins the day is when we're stressed, and the stress is high, it's a crisis, it's an emergency, or even if it's just something that is kind of a thing that happens a few times a year and it's stressful. Are we all of a sudden going to rise to the occasion and be a highly prepared, highly responsive school in that moment of crisis? Or are we going to fall back on the preparation that has happened prior to the crisis or emergency? And I know that's kind of scary and kind of unnerving to talk about, but it's just something to think about, how practicing in private matters most when the stress is the highest. So what are the 4 leadership lessons from the 1988 Jamaican bobsled team? Number 1, your vision must be bigger than your current circumstances. Number 2, take yourself seriously even if others don't. Number 3, the right leader makes all the difference. And number 4, practicing in private matters most when stress is the highest. And I like to end every episode with a call to action. And I would encourage you to pick one leadership lesson out of the 4 and just take one action toward making that better for you in your practice and for you at your school. And just another quick reminder, I had one coaching spot that has opened up yesterday. I would love to help you with your biggest struggle at school. You can go to theprivateschoolleader.com/coaching to see testimonials from over 24 clients, to see what coaching packages I offer. You could just shoot me an email at mark.o.minkus@gmail.com if you want to learn more. And then a final reminder about your free resource that I'm offering you today that I'd love for you to just grab. The top 6 ways to protect your school from a lawsuit. Go to theprivateschoolleader.com/lawsuit, and that's free for you there. And I appreciate you. I'm very grateful for you taking time to listen to this podcast episode today. If you get help from any podcast episodes, please share the link to this podcast with another leader that you know or a rising leader at your school. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. Again, I appreciate all your amazing hard work, and thank you for taking the time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.